Almost 30 years ago, a bright young man working in marketing for the Pizza Hut division of Pepsi sat in his apartment in Wichita, Kansas, and dreamed of a new future for society. It was a connected future, one in which communications and computing would close great distances and bring people together into an electronic community. And it would do more than that. It would deliver news and information, entertainment and education. It would be a liberating and revolutionary experience. And he wanted to be the entrepreneur to create it. His name was Steve Case. Within a decade, he would make his way to the East Coast, would become head of marketing of a startup online service, would rename that service America Online, and begin to make his vision of a connected community come true. By the end of the century, it would be one of the most valuable companies in the world, and its merger with the media giant Time Warner would be a bold and very public experiment about a world where content and platforms join forces in the consumer market. Today, Steve Case continues to explore his entrepreneurial vision in a different way. His own company, called Revolution, is seeking to find and mentor talented startup teams in all parts of the country. And his new movement, called Rise of the Rest, is helping to illustrate that great entrepreneurial ideas are not limited to Silicon Valley and New York. Let's take a look.
Well, I think what's made this country great is entrepreneurship. And part of what's made that entrepreneurship story so successful is a diverse mix of people and voices. And we've always been an immigrant nation. Silicon Valley will continue to be great. Big cities like New York will continue to be great. But the story around what's happening in the rest of America, this, the rise of the rest, is a story that I think will get told more and more in the next 5 or 10 years. There are great companies being built all across the country. Every one of the 50 states has great entrepreneurship. We want to tell those stories so people recognize that what's happening in this rise of the rest is a central part of the future of the country. Now, last time when we fired up the bus to do the rise of the rest in 4 cities, we started in Detroit, then went to Pittsburgh, then Cincinnati, then Nashville. Next stop, we're gonna kick it off in the second week of October, October 6th. We started off in Madison, Wisconsin, then go to Minneapolis, then go to Des Moines, and then Kansas City, and we're going to end in St. Louis. 5 great American cities, and we think are ripe for a reinvention around entrepreneurship, around startups. We'll kick it off with a meeting in the morning, usually a breakfast meeting with some of the community leaders. We'll get on the bus and visit different startups, visit some of the accelerators in each of these cities. Then we'll gather some of the entrepreneurs together, have a discussion, sort of a fireside chat, and then we'll have a pitch competition in the afternoon, and the winner gets a $100,000 investment. There are great companies being built all across the country. People recognize that what's happening in this rise of the rest is a central part of the future of the country.
Please join me in welcoming Steve Case.
Good evening, everybody.
Thanks for being here tonight.
Great to be here.
How are you?
I'm doing terrific.
It's ironic. You were telling me a minute ago that we came to Washington to interview you, and yesterday you were in San Francisco.
I almost called you and said, "You sure you want to do Revolutionaries on the road?" Because I happen to be in San Francisco. But I love the idea that you are hitting the road, and I'm honored to be the first of your Revolutionaries on the road.
Thanks. Well, as
welcome
a guy,
to Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Thanks. As a guy who's spending a lot of time on the road, you can probably appreciate what that means. Let me ask you. I'm going to start by just talking a bit about your background. So, childhood in Hawaii, college at Williams College. You clearly had a vision, as I was talking about in the introduction, though, for the way that you believed the world was going to work, even as you were graduating. When did you get that vision, and why did you feel so strongly about it?
I got it when I was in college, so it was 1979, 80, that time frame, and I was reading a lot of different things. I was about to graduate, trying to figure out what I was going to do, but I'd spent a good bit of time. I did some things in the classroom, but also some things out of the classroom, and one of the things I did out of the classroom was I was really curious about what was happening in terms of innovation, and particularly what's happening in innovation and technology. And I'd read a bunch of things that were being tested, some interactive TV experiments and things called video text and teletext and these sort of electronic newspapers and home banking and things like that. And I was kind of intrigued. They were very small kind of tests, but they were interesting. And I also remember reading a book when I was in college called The Third Wave. By Alvin Toffler, a futurist I'm sure many people have heard of. And I was really taken by this particular book because he talked about the notion sort of an electronic cottage. And we were on this electronic frontier, and there are new ways that technology would connect people, and new ways that people could access information. And even though it was futuristic, and when he wrote it, which I think was 1979, it was well before that became mainstream. I remember reading it and being riveted by it, and said, "This is going to happen, and I want to be part of making it happen."
There aren't many artifacts about the way that young entrepreneurs think when they're turning into young entrepreneurs. But as it turns out for you, either you or someone very close to you saved your job application in 1980 to the advertising firm J. Walter Thompson. This is in Walter
I believe
Isaacson's
rejected
book.
me just for the point of factual record.
Here's the quote. It says, "I firmly believe that technological advances in communications are on the verge of significantly altering our way of life. Innovations will result in our television sets becoming an information line, newspaper, school, computer, referendum machine, and catalog." That's very specific in 1980. I mean, that is a very specific vision of the way people were going to live their lives.
And 34 years later, I still believe it.
Yeah.
The only thing that changed is at the beginning, obviously this was before the personal computer really had been invented. And, some computers existed, but they were still mostly mini computers. So the idea that this would happen through the television seemed likely. Obviously, a lot of it happened in that first wave through the personal computer, and then through mobile devices, particularly smartphones, and now is becoming more kind of connected to the television. But the idea, and it builds on this the thinking based on reading this Alvin Toffler book and just poking around in terms of some of the experiments that were happening at the time. The idea that you could be anywhere and connect to people all over the world, and also get information from sources all over the world. It was obvious. Now, like many of these things, what seemed obvious to me in 1980 really took a while. It wasn't until the mid-90s that what we now all think of as the internet became popular. And for more than a decade, when we were pursuing this, it was a struggle. It was not really taking off. And there were many times where friends and families, my parents, said, "Are you sure you believe in this?" Because it doesn't seem like people are buying into it. I mean,
and why the television? I mean, was that the main screen in everyone's home?
That was just the main screen,
okay.
and some of the initial kind of experiments that some companies were doing tended to focus on the television because it was the main device. Remember, the phones at the time had no display, and computers didn't really exist. So it certainly didn't exist in homes. So the only device that was pervasive in homes was the television. That was a screen with sort of the ability to transmit signals to it. So the initial expectation was the television would be a key part of this whole revolution.
Now, before we leave this early visioning part, I want to ask you about the road that you didn't take, because some people who were involved in that vision at that point went into computer science. They went into coding. They wanted to go through the technical side of it as opposed to another side. Did that ever appeal to you at all?
No. I did take one computer course in college, and this was again the late '70s, where it was still the punch card era. You write some program, and you basically hand your punch cards in and wait a few hours for them to get processed, and then come back and say you didn't do that right. At least often that was my response, and I hated it. I thought it was really boring, and the idea that you're waiting, for this answer struck me as kind of strange. But at the same time, I think it was a useful experience because that's when I started being focused on the power of this unleashed could be significant, but it's got to be more friendly. It's got to be more accessible. It's got to be something that everyday people can interact with and use, not just people with kind of computer science degrees. So I didn't really enjoy it. I never really thought of myself as a technologist, certainly not an engineer. I think my interest was trying to figure out a way to take what was possible and make it accessible, and not just to a small number of people, but to everybody.
Yeah.
So this sort of populist notion of computing, and then the internet was what drove me, and it requires a mix of people who do understand the technology and can kind of push the limits with people from the outside who know enough to ask the right questions, but to push and push and push and say, how do we make this simpler? How do we make it friendlier? How do we make it more affordable? How do we make it something that everybody can use, not just a few people? And that idea of really opening up the power of these tools, whether it be computing tools or communication tools, particularly the internet, was always the part of it that most kind of drove me.
You went to, there weren't many, let's say, conventional routes to the vision that you were wanting to pursue. So you ended up going to two of the great marketing companies in America, first Procter & Gamble and then Pepsi. What did you learn in marketing in those companies for a guy who has already had a very strong marketing orientation already that helped you along the way eventually in your career?
I learned a lot of things, and I think again, when I graduated in 1980, I was passionate about this idea. As it mentioned in this letter to J. Walter Thompson, I wrote to a lot of people a similar idea that the world's going to change, technology is going to change it, communication is going to change it. Hire me, and I will help you figure out this world. And most people probably got the letter and said, what is this guy talking about? But at the time, there weren't companies to go to pursue this. It was just still in the earliest stage. And so I said, even though I think that's a big idea, something I'm pretty passionate about, I'm going to have to get there in some other way. And it became, what companies could I go to where hopefully I could make a contribution, but also could learn a lot. And Procter & Gamble was and is a great marketing company. Had a great training program because I didn't have an MBA, just had a college degree. I said I really want that job because it's a great company and I'll learn a lot, and particularly learn a lot about marketing. In their case, I think they do a great job of understanding consumers, not just kind of talking with them among themselves in their office about how the world might exist or change in their view, but actually getting out in the market, talking to real consumers, whether it be focus groups or test markets of different products, and really find out what real people are thinking. I also learned the importance of simplifying things. That one of the things that P&G, I assume they still do it, it really kind of pushed their newbies like me to do is to basically make a recommendation in one page. Not have a long memo. It's much harder to write a one-page memo than it is to write a 20-page memo, and being succinct and clear about your recommendation and why, I think, was a lesson. And the third, which became actually very helpful when AOL started expanding, was the idea of sampling, that they used free samples, free trials. If they're launching a new shampoo, they would basically have little samples of that shampoo and bundle it in with newspapers or send it to you via mail. And the idea that to get somebody to try something that they haven't tried before, you got to give them a free sample of it. Was important. PepsiCo was a little bit different. P&G was a great company, but it's kind of a top-down command and control kind of classic company. The part of PepsiCo I was involved was pizza, the restaurant division, and that was more bottoms up because it really was kind of run by the franchisees out in the field, not by the executives at the corporate level. And so for me, that was an interesting dynamic, and I realized that again, the great innovation happens on the fringes, and you have to be paying attention to what's going on those fringes, not just what's being cooked up in the R&D labs at the corporate headquarters. Get out there and find out what's happening, and so all those lessons, I think, ended up being helpful as we tried to take the idea of online services and the internet and make them part of everyday life.
Let's flash forward then a little bit, because your brother Dan, who is in investment banking at that point, tells you about an opportunity in Washington. You guys were talking about a lot of different things because I think he believed in your vision too.
Yeah, he knew. Okay, we've been talking about it since I was even in college. He knew I had this this interest, and because he was working in San Francisco in the investment banking business, he was seeing different things. So occasionally he would send me some company to look at or startup to look at, and then he did send me one he was thinking of investing in that was doing something out here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, a guy named Bill von Meister, right? Had started a service called The Source that had gone away, or he had left the source, and the source
He had
was still
started
existing.
like a dozen companies.
Yeah.
He was a classic entrepreneur. He had an idea a minute, and he's great at launching these ideas, launching a company. So he had a bunch of different companies. Source was one of the first kind of online services. They positioned it as an information utility, and then he brought in an investor, and then they kind of sold the majority interest to Reader's Digest. So he kind of, in the process, kind of lost interest, but was still looking at ways to do things. Was really innovative around create a company, and I think it was probably 1981, called the Home Music Store, really imagining the future of what we now take for granted with the iPod and digital music. But he had the idea of delivering music through the cable systems, but the record companies didn't really want to participate, so that didn't really get off
That's
the
an
ground.
age-old story.
Yeah, it was a challenge even in the early 80s, and he tried a bunch of different things. But the one that really intrigued me, which actually led me to move to this area, Washington, D.C., was a company called Control Video Corporation, but the product was called GameLine. And the reason it was intriguing to me is it was in 1982 when it started, and 1983 was when I moved to D.C. to join it. Still nobody had, or virtually nobody had, personal computers in homes. Very few in offices, but almost none in homes. But a lot of people had Atari game machines. And the Atari game machine was the most pervasive consumer technology, other than television itself, in people's homes. And so the idea was create this product called GameLine, which kind of looked like a game cartridge, but it actually was a communications modem that you then plugged in the phone line. And then you could turn that Atari game machine into an interactive terminal. And you could download games, almost like an in-home arcade. Instead of buying the games, you could just download the ones you wanted to use, almost like a HBO for games, or an in-home arcade. But over time, the part that intrigued me was, well, if you can download games, you could also download email or encyclopedia information or stock quotes or other kinds of things. So that was finally, there's a path to pursue this vision of trying to get everybody online, and that's why I moved to this area to join GameLine.
And then at the same time, there's the rise of the personal computer. At exactly the same moment, Apple is bringing personal computers into the marketplace. People are buying them, starting to experiment, and then you do an incredibly brave thing. You decide Apple has got to become a partner, and you move to Cupertino, and somehow you talk Apple into giving you a desk at Apple. And you're there insisting that Apple is going to partner with you and make this business go. How in the world did you get a desk inside Apple Computer?
I think people started feeling sorry for me because it was a few years later. To quickly go through, the GameLine product, even though it seemed like a great idea, failed.
Yeah.
And the reason was the Atari video game market, just as the GameLine was coming to market, kind of imploded. So we had to reposition it away from Atari game machines to this new
PCs,
home computer
right.
business. And our first partnership was with Commodore. The most popular home computer in the mid-1980s was a Commodore 64. So we worked with them to create a service called Q-Link that was customized for Commodore. And then we worked with Tandy, which had a really strong personal computer line at the time, to create a service called PC Link. And we also worked with IBM to create a service called Promenade. So our business for most of the mid to late 80s was private label online services in partnership with PC companies. And we knew Apple was a key partner, and they had never licensed their brand name to any other company. And we decided we're going to figure out some way to get them to do that. So I did move to San Francisco for about 6 months and did show up every day at their office, trying to figure out some way to break in, talk to the marketing group and the product group and also the customer service group. And the customer service group was the most interested. They said, well, this could be interesting if we created an Apple branded online service in partnership with our company. That could be an interesting way to provide customer support to Apple users and then other services over time. So that was our inroad. But it took a while, a few months to kind of get them to kind of commit to it. And I'd show up every day and show up every day. Finally, one day I said, since I'm showing up every day and every day I sign in and you can kind of come get me, why don't you just give me like a pass or something, a contractor badge or something, and to save you the hassle. And I said, yeah, that kind of makes sense. And I was kind of sitting around like different conference rooms and said, there's like a little cubicle over there. You mind if I just go there? And they said, sure, that's fine. They were very, very friendly. I was very kind. And then finally, after a few more months, we finally did strike the deal, and we created a service called Apple Link Personal Edition, initially for the Apple II, but we were hopeful and had plans to also support the Macintosh, which was just coming to market at the time.
What were you learning about the way people were going online and what they were doing, given that you eventually did have deals with all these PC
Well, it evolved.
companies?
In 1985, when we actually started what's now known as AOL, we had different brands for a while, but initially the company was called Quantum Computer Services. I mentioned the brands were Q-Link and Promenade and PC Link and Apple Link Personal Edition. And when we started in 1985, and again, this seems crazy now because of how pervasive the internet is, but in 1985, only 3% of people were online in this country. And they were only online, those 3% were only online on average 1 hour a week. So it was still the earliest days in terms of getting things going. And there were a lot of reasons for it. Most people did not have computers. The people who did have computers, most did not have a modem. Why? Because the computer industry, for most of that decade, decided the modem was a non-essential peripheral. You actually went to the peripheral section of the computer store to get this thing called a modem, and then had to figure out how to plug it in and figure out how to make the software work. So it was kind of defining modems, communications, now the internet as non-essential. We felt it was the most essential, but it took us a few years to finally convince. IBM was the first to say, okay, we'll build a modem into our new home PC line, then others had to do it as well. The communication networks then were way too expensive. You'd spend $10 an hour to be online. That's why you're only online an hour a week. It was really, really expensive. The software to get online was really hard to use. The services, once you got online, were not that interesting. So there actually were some reasons why it was only 3% of the people using it only an hour a week, and we just had to kind of knock away at those by making the software easier, the services more compelling, the communications networks cheaper, building modems in so they became ubiquitous, and when you turned on your computer, it automatically gave you the option to get online. It took us about 5 years to kind of put that basic foundation in place, that basic framework in place, so it really took off. So we had to just do custom services. The Commodore 64 audience was more interested in games. So we did a partnership with George Lucas and Lucasfilm to create the first graphical multiplayer game in the late 1980s using a 300 baud modem. And so how do you create something for that audience? With IBM, their interest when they were relaunching their home computer line was learning, education. So we created a lot of services around learning education. Apple, as I mentioned, was interested in customer support and software downloading and features like that. So the Apple Link Personal Edition was focused on that. So it really was identifying these different segments based on what computer you were buying, which services you're more likely to be interested in. That's really what we did for the first 5 years or so before we then kind of relaunched it as America Online.
And you did. You rebranded in 1991, called it America Online. Why America Online? What fit for you in that world of fragmented services?
Well, it's really two reasons. The first, I should say, because I think it's an important lesson for entrepreneurs, is even if you have a vision, even if you have a passion, it's rare that you pursue it in a straight line. It usually is circuitous, and usually there are bumps in the road, if not boulders in the road. You need to figure out how to navigate and not give up. The reason we created our own brand called America Online was actually not out of design or desire. It was out of crisis. Apple, who I mentioned, I spent all this time, 6 months, kind of trying to convince them to license for the first time their Apple brand name to an independent company. After they had done that, had second thoughts. They said, we're not sure we want to have some other company with the Apple brand. And our strategy, even in that time, in the late 80s, was to give our software away. We wanted to give people free trials of our software. Their strategy was to sell software through Apple authorized stores. We wanted to give it away to everybody. There was all kinds of these channel conflicts and strategy conflicts. So eventually they said, we're going to, we want to pull out of the deal. We don't want to continue to be part of the Apple Link Personal Edition. We want you to, kind of go away, and we'll, we'll negotiate a kind of a settlement. Give you some money to you're kind of sorry that we had this change of heart, changed our mind, but we don't want to be partners with you, and we don't want to have you, even though we agreed to license your Apple name to you, we don't want to do that anymore, which was kind of a problem. So that's like kind of a crisis. It's
blew a
like,
little
wow,
hole in the
our whole
business plan.
strategy, because we didn't have a lot of capital, and some of the big competitors at the time, like Prodigy, backed by IBM and Sears and for a while CBS, and they agreed to spend $1 billion to launch Prodigy. We had raised a few $1 million in venture capital, and the whole strategy was we're not going to compete with those big guys kind of head to head. We have to do it through partnerships, and these private label services like Apple Link were key. Somehow Apple's like pulling the rug out from under us. But anyway, we realized that after we tried to kind of get them to change their mind and keep us, they were pretty committed to having us move on. And so we had to rename the service.
Yeah.
And that's what led to a contest internally. We didn't have the money to hire like a branding firm. So we said, okay, let's have a little contest here. And we had a few dozen suggestions. And one of them actually was Online America, which I thought was pretty good, but decided flipping it to America Online would be better. And the reason it was my preferred choice, even though some people in the company thought it was a little almost hokey, was because it described what we're doing. We wanted to get America Online. We did not have a marketing budget to explain what we were like Prodigy did. We wanted to have the name be pretty descriptive, kind of self-evident. And so it was the combination of the crisis created by Apple when they said, thank you very much, we don't want to work with you anymore, and the need to rebrand it, but do it in a way that created a brand that kind of stood for the journey we were on, trying to get America Online in a way that anybody would hear America Online, they kind of know what it meant kind of instantly. So finally we did that. We relaunched the service as America Online. And really within months, our customers, as America Online was a little bit of a mouthful, started kind of shortening it. And there was two camps. One was AO for America Online, and the other was AOL for America Online. And while actually we spelled online as one word, so arguably it should have been AO, we thought AOL just seemed better. It's like MTV is 3 letters and CNN is 3 letters, and it's going to be AOL. And we always spelled it America Online as 2 words, but we quickly said if people are going to nickname it, let's embrace the AOL one. Let's kind of lean into the AOL one. And that's when that really took off as the brand name.
You mentioned venture capital, and that leads me to ask another question. This is the late 80s, early 90s. Silicon Valley, the rise of Silicon Valley has begun. Tremendous amount of money flowing into and out of venture investments there. You didn't do that, and you stayed in Washington, D.C., and you didn't relocate or try to go to the Valley. What was your thinking about that, and how did you view Silicon Valley and what was happening there at that point?
Well, our thinking was we were here because we had joined this other company, this Bill von Meister game line company, and there was 3 co-founders of AOL, myself, Jim Kimsey, and Mark Serif. We had to work together at this previous company, and we were already here. So that's why we started here. It wasn't like a grand plan. We were here. And once we got going and we hired some engineers and started with a couple dozen people, it started expanding. And there was a point where we debated whether we should move to Silicon Valley. Because that was where a lot of the, obviously a lot of the momentum was. But we concluded we should stay here, and it actually turned out about to be the right thing. It took us a little longer to hire people because there wasn't the same level of talent, and particularly entrepreneurial talent. We had to lure people away from large companies typically, and said, well, we're a small company, and we're going to cut your salary if you join us, but we have this thing called stock options, and we think that's going to be worth something. And some people bought into that. Most didn't. They said, no, I'm not going to go from this company that's doing well and I'm getting paid pretty well to a company that may or may not make it, and even I'm going to take a big salary cut. But there were enough people who believed in the idea that they were willing to join. And once they joined, they really were passionate about that. And because there frankly weren't as many entrepreneurial companies here at the time, it's changed since then. But at the time, once we got them into our world, they tended to stay. So they were more loyal, partly because of the mission, but also because there were fewer options in terms of technology and innovation and entrepreneurship here. So it ended up working out well, and now 30 years later, it's great to see the Washington D.C. area. It's really developed nicely as a entrepreneurial ecosystem. There's a lot of momentum here.
Then something else happens that turns out to be pretty crucial, but it's not necessarily well known. The internet was growing at that point, but it was entirely restricted. Only universities, government agencies, certain other entities who were approved by the government could get a connection to the internet. Then in 1993, the Clinton administration opens the internet to everyone and says, if you're a commercial company, if you're a private company, you too can come connect to the internet. The pipes are open,
Right.
and do what you want to do with it. When did you first understand that the opening of the internet might be crucial to the kind of vision that you
we knew
had?
it all along, because as you're describing, we essentially were living in a parallel world.
Yeah.
You know, from even the time I read this Alvin Toffler book in 1979, 1980, until 1992, 1993 timeframe, everything we were building was separated from the internet. We built our own email system. We built our own kind of page description, language. We built everything on it, and everybody else competing, Prodigy and CompuServe and the Source and the Well, and everybody else was sort of doing the same kind of thing. It would have been illegal for us to connect our commercial online service, AOL, to the internet until that change happened.
Mm-hmm.
It was restricted to essentially government use and university use. But we knew once that bridge was built, it would have the potential to accelerate, the growth, and there would be more kind of standardization. But it took a number of years before that, finally happened. So once it was clear it was happening, we moved pretty expeditiously to try to be the first company to really embrace the internet and position it as, coming through AOL as the best on-ramp to the internet, and we were providing a whole set of services, content, community, commerce, that was unique to AOL. So it was sort of the internet and a whole lot more at an affordable price with easier to use software and faster speeds, because some of the things we were doing with technology to expedite the delivery of graphic images. That was the message in the mid-90s. AOL was the path to the internet, and at the peak of AOL's growth, I think about half of all the internet usage in the United States was through AOL, because we had positioned ourselves as that on-ramp.
Well, then this other crazy thing happens at exactly the same moment, which is that Tim Berners-Lee perfects the software for the World Wide Web, and suddenly you've got the internet, you've got the web, you've got personal computers, you've got America Online and a way to get access to it. Did that seem just like the craziest world you could imagine? I mean, it was part of your vision,
it's
but
the world I'd imagined a decade
Exactly,
earlier. It was crazy that it took so long in my mind before it happened. Like, finally, duh. We've been saying this for more than a decade.
Right.
No, it finally the different pieces came together, and I think I learned from that whole journey that revolutions often happen in evolutionary ways. Yeah. Occasionally, there's something that comes out of nowhere as sort of an overnight success, but it's actually pretty rare. We knew relatively early, we believed in the idea of community and connecting people and content and so forth. What we now take for granted is the internet. But the path from believing in that idea to making it a reality, making it part of everyday life, was more than a decade, and a lot of hard work, and a lot of ups and a lot of downs. I think that is not uncommon. There's a great Thomas Edison quote that I love to cite, because he's one of America's greatest entrepreneurs and greatest innovators, which was, vision without execution is hallucination. Having the vision, having the idea is great. It's really important. But you also have to execute against that idea, and often you have to do that in a passionate, persistent way over a long period of time if you're going to really achieve that vision. And that certainly was the case there. Even when we went public in 1992, so the internet was still just about to be commercialized. We're still operating in this sort of separate kind of parallel world. And AOL went public in March of 1992. It was the first internet company, online company, to go public. We'd been at it now, I'd been working on it for more than a decade, but from the founding of AOL in 1985 to when we went public in 1992 was about 7 years. 7 years into it, we had 184,000 subscribers. And we had like $30 million of revenue. And the day we went public, we raised $10 million, and the company was worth $60 million. We'd been at it for 7 years. That's I wouldn't say the bad news, because it was, even though it was difficult, it was a fun journey. 7 years later, the company had gone from 184,000 customers to, I think at the peak, about 30 million customers, and from revenues of $30 million to $5 billion, and a market value of $60 million to $150 billion. So that was sort of this first wave took forever, and it was a slog. And then finally, things kind of came together, and that's when the internet became part of everyday life, and AOL really was able to, ride that wave, in some cases drive that wave to build a significant company that really had a more significant impact.
Well, it really was one of the most explosive corporate growth stories ever in the history of the country, was the growth of AOL in the 1990s. And you did something else that's really interesting. AOL became a content company, not just simply a way to get on the internet or to navigate the internet more easily. And I'm not talking about the Time Warner thing. We're going to get to that in a minute. But AOL as a company was offering a lot of content channels and partnering with a lot of content people in addition to your other lines of business. Why did you decide that adding that or even pivoting to content was an important thing?
Our strategy always was to be differentiated. And so we did want to provide the best, fastest, cheapest, most usable on-ramp to the internet, including the World Wide Web. So you could use AOL to get to anything. But in addition to that, we wanted to provide a portfolio of services that were exclusive to AOL. So that if you had that on-ramp to the internet plus a bunch of things that were exclusive to us, why wouldn't you go with us? And it was a mix. Content, community, commerce, things like that were all part of it. And also, context, just how do you make it simple was important. The core to it always was community, was people. We always believed that was the killer app. When we launched our first service in 1985, we launched instant messaging, which then led to AIM and texting and a lot of other things. We had launched People Connection, allowing people to go into chat rooms. I mentioned we launched this game with Lucasfilm, a multiplayer graphical game where real people were playing against each other. People was the core. It was the soul of the medium. It was, for us, the killer app. That was always our focus. But after making that the main focus for pretty much a decade, we said this next wave, as we try to reach even more people and differentiate even more significantly, content is going to be more important, and brands are going to be more important. Some of that was going to be user-generated content, message boards and things like that. But some of it also is going to be some of the best known, best respected, most trusted brands. So we did a partnership in the early 90s with Time Magazine, for example, and about the same time with the Smithsonian, the first time a museum went online. We were establishing these partnerships with respected brands because that would help differentiate us, number one, and number two, would kind of legitimize the medium, that more people would be willing to get on the internet because of these trusted brands. So that's when we still focused on community at the core, but that's when we made more of an investment in content. We also launched around that same time frame our own investment effort, AOL Greenhouse, and then AOL Studios to actually help incubate and invest in some of these new content brands. We wanted the best of the old traditional legacy brands, if you will, that people knew, and it was part of brands that were part of everyday life, and we wanted to supplement that with the next generation of brands by incubating them and investing in them.
Well, I happened to be running PBS.org at the time, and I guarantee you when we did our content partnership with AOL, it was the single most important partnership we had, just because of the size of the audience that opened up and the ease with which people could get there. Okay, so here we are.
One last point, one of the brands that was content brands first to go online in partnership with us was ESPN, and they invested very heavily early on in the internet. And that's part of the reason now, today, 25 years later, ESPN is one of the most valuable content brands around. They believed in the internet, invested in the internet when others were skeptical, not quite sure, how much to bet on it. And 25 years ago, if you had predicted, in the sports sector, it was likely going to be some new brands that emerged, and some new brands did emerge, but ESPN has become an even stronger brand, and that would only have happened. It only could have happened because they committed so early and invested so aggressively to make sure they were kind of the first mover in the digital world.
So here we are. You've got us all living in a world where we're getting lots of AOL CD-ROMs free in the mail. There's your free sampling. The most famous but unknown voice maybe ever, Elwood Edwards, is telling us you've got mail and telling us goodbye when we log off. Millions of people have the email address ending at AOL.com. How many people still have your AOL.com email address? Well, see, lots and lots. And we're all instant messaging and IMing and using content
And then comes the merger with Time Warner. Just talk a bit about the hope for that merger. I mean, here you have, you mentioned Time, the publishing empire of Time, the film empire of Warner, the cable empire of Turner, the internet empire of AOL, all coming together under one roof. Why was that so important at that moment in AOL's history?
Well, it's really several things. First of all, and in terms of the vision of it was, if you look at we announced it in January of 2000, so almost 15 years ago. And the press release, I read it recently, but I believe it basically talked about the world converging of technology and media and the opportunities in new areas like digital music and video and even television. We believed over time would work more like the internet, where you pick sites as opposed to have kind of scheduled programming. We had that sense, and the combined assets of all these companies should have positioned us better than anybody to kind of lead into that future. So that was a part of it. Just our bet on where the puck was going, as Wayne Gretzky used to say, you have to focus not on where the puck is, but where the puck was going. And those brands and that broader way of content was going to be important. Secondarily, we knew we were the leader in what dial-up communications, what at the time was known as narrowband. We did not have a clear path to broadband. The cable companies really controlled that, and we were unsuccessful in a variety of efforts to, even here in Washington, to have them open that up. The phone company, because of what happened with the breakup of AT&T and some of the rulings by Judge Green more than 30 years ago, basically was forced to open up their network, and that unleashed enormous innovation in the sector, including the commercialization of the internet. The cable industry was allowed to keep things closed and more controlled in the broadband world in this kind of late 1990s timeframe. So we were concerned, what is the path to broadband, and Time Warner had the largest cable system in the country, Time Warner Cable. So that would give us a path to broadband. And the third was more of a diversification issue. I mentioned that we'd seen the value of the company grow quite dramatically. Actually was the best performing stock in the 1990s, more than Microsoft or Cisco. I think it was like a 12,000% increase, something like that. And we'd gone, as I said, from the public offering in 1992 of $70 million to the time we announced the merger in January 2000, I think it was $150 or $160 billion. And that was for a company that was pretty significant, had pretty significant market share, and had $5 billion in revenue and $1 billion of profit, but was still a pretty high multiple based on any kind of historical numbers in terms of a multiple of revenue and multiple of profits. And so we basically concluded it would be better for our shareholders to, instead of owning 100% of a company that had $5 billion of revenue and $1 billion of profit, was to negotiate a deal, which we did, to own 55% of a company, AOL plus Time Warner, that had $40 billion of revenue and $10 billion of profit, and a much more diversified mix of businesses. So the decision to merge really was driven partly based on the strategic sense of where the market was going, partly based on an imperative to figure out a path to broadband, as well as a recognition that the company would be more stable and more likely to be valuable if it was part of a larger entity with some of the other brands. Time Warner Cable, Time Inc., Warner Brothers Studios, Turner, including CNN, Warner Music, HBO. It was a great set of iconic brands and pretty significant businesses. So that's really what led us to conclude to merge.
And on the other side, your counterpart, Jerry Levin, had a lot of the same beliefs. He believed that converged future was coming, and even though they were content rich as a company, they lacked the platform that AOL had. Why? When was it clear, when you and Jerry Levin got together, that the two of you really shared this and it seemed like it could really work?
I had known Jerry, and we'd actually, as I mentioned, worked with Time Warner for a number of years on a number of different initiatives. So I knew him. I knew he had early on been a pioneer himself. He actually helped launch HBO, and he helped, was really quite aggressive in expanding their cable distribution, footprint, and invested heavily in a lot of different interactive ventures. So I knew all along that he was a believer, and I think he was intrigued with what we had built, and also was, just as we were concerned about our path to broadband, he was concerned about his path to digital, because their brands and the DNA of the company was more focused on the businesses that existed, and they kind of were tended to look through the rearview mirror as opposed to kind of look forward and really embrace in a significant way this digital future. So I think that was a driver for him as well. So it wasn't really early on. Strategically, I think there was a sense that these the value of these companies could be significant if they're pulled together. It was really more a debate about how do you strike a deal? What was the merger deal given the vastly different valuations of a fast-growing internet company like AOL and a still growing but slower growing, more traditional media company. That's what really took a few months to kind of figure out.
I know when you talk to young entrepreneurs, you talk to them not just about the idea and about the model, you talk to them about the culture and the kind of healthy culture you have to build within a company. And a lot has been written about AOL and Time Warner and the very different cultures of the two companies, fast-moving, internet-oriented platform, different kinds of very traditional businesses. In the end, how much do you think that cultural difference between the two companies influenced or affected the merger?
It was huge. And it goes back to what I said earlier, the Thomas Edison quote, vision without execution
Right.
is hallucination. I think the vision of the company was sound, and even today, looking back at that, people seeing what's now happened in terms of convergence and the growth of new businesses like YouTube or the launch by Apple, the iPod and the Apple Music Store. These are things that AOL and Time Warner should have been able to lead on given the assets they had. But ultimately, it's not about vision, it's about execution. And execution is about people. And the reality is different people were focused on different things. And we knew that going in, that Time Warner had a lot of independent divisions used to doing different things. But we thought the promise of this digital age and the power or the potential impact of this combined company would lead people to focus more on what could bring everybody together and help all the different businesses. And we also believed that, we knew that the history of Time Warner really had been built through acquisition. And each of the divisions at one point was a great entrepreneurially led entity. Henry Luce created Time Inc. Jack Warner created Warner Brothers. Ted Turner created Turner. These are iconic entrepreneurs. So it was a family of entrepreneurial businesses that had gotten scale. So we were hoping to re-inject some of that entrepreneurial passion. But people didn't work well together. It was frustrating to watch as part of the merger. I agreed to step aside as CEO, so I was playing kind of more of a passive role as chairman of the board, but didn't have any operating responsibility, including AOL didn't report to me.
Jerry Levin became the CEO.
Jerry Levin became the CEO, and it was just hard to get everybody to work together, and that was made more difficult because within months after announcing the merger, the economy kind of went into tailspin, and internet stocks went into tailspin. There were a bunch of companies that went bankrupt, and a lot of companies lost 99% of their value in the year or two after the merger, which put pressure on our stock, and people saw the value of it decline, which created more anger
pressure
and frustration among people in the company, and more kind of pressure. So I think the idea was a good idea. I still believe that, the vision, if you will, but the execution was not there, and there were some external factors that contributed to that. But at the core, people were not aligned around the same vision, working together, collaborative. So one of the takeaways for me, which I do share with entrepreneurs, is that innovation, entrepreneurship is a team sport. If everybody's doing their own thing, you're not going to win. You've got to be aligned. You've got to be working together. You've got to be kind of in it to win it as a team. And sadly, the part of the story of that merger was people did not work together as a team, and great opportunities that could have been captured did not get captured. And actually, there started to be reverse synergies instead of positive synergies. There were negative synergies and initiatives that AOL was launching, for example, around communications long before Skype and other WhatsApp came out. AOL had a slew of products. Well, the cable division wanted to kill that because they also were doing something. And so there was the positives of the merger didn't really materialize, and some negatives did in a context of a market that was significantly and kind of being corrected, and that really led to something that turned out to be a great disappointment. But I think there are a lot of lessons in terms of this idea of vision without execution is hallucination, and a lot of lessons about people and team and trust and relationships.
Have you ever thought about whether the the outcome might have been different if the roles had been reversed, if you'd taken over as the CEO and had direct operating responsibility?
Yeah, of course, I thought about that, and the people have speculated that. It's hard to know. I think there was some things happening, as I mentioned, externally that would have made it difficult for anybody. I like to believe if I was, kind of in that CEO role, things would have been different and better. But it's hard to know and speculate. And I generally try to avoid the woulda, coulda, shoulda strategy, and generally have a focus on what's happening next, not kind of litigating what happened before.
I just had to ask that question. It's the stock slides less than 2 years after the merger. It's $15 a share. There are lots of changes in the merged company. You step down as chairman. Ultimately, the deal gets completely unwound. AOL is spun off. Time Warner now an independent company back to its old ticker symbol TWX. I wonder if you look back on it. Just a couple of questions. One, we are seeing a lot of the things that you talked about being realized. Netflix is producing original content like House of Cards. Platforms and content companies have completely merged. Do you feel, I don't know if vindicated is the right word, but do you feel good about the fact that this vision that you had many, many years ago really actually has come to be realized? We just had to wait a while on it before it all actually gets here.
It goes back to my belief that the idea is nice, the vision is important, but execution is more important. So saying, we had this idea and now it's proving to be the case, I think that is true. But the reality is we collectively failed to execute against that vision, and that's always going to be a disappointment. And my view when I was on the board was that the value of the company and the potential impact in terms of people's lives would be maximized if we thought of this company as one company, integrate and think as one company. The alternative would be to break it into separate companies so they each were more nimble, kind of focused way. I actually still believe that there would be more potential in terms of the integration, but ultimately the decision was to go the other direction and liberate, which led not just to spin out AOL, but spin out Time Inc. and Time Warner Cable and different entities as separate businesses.
All right, so let's talk about today and where you've moved on to. Talk about your vision for Revolution. It's just an incredible series of things that you're doing with a lot of amazing people inside of it, many of whom you've known for a long time. How did you put this together, and what was your vision for what you wanted it to do?
Well, it evolved. I think it's a lot of these things. When I first stepped down as CEO of AOL almost 15 years ago, I started making some investments, just personal investments. And we invested in things like Zipcar over a decade ago, the first kind of sharing economy company, which was really pioneering the idea of car sharing, and invested in some healthcare initiatives, including one is now a public company called Everyday Health, a bunch of different initiatives. And that was the first wave of it. And that we kind of like doing that. We kind of like backing entrepreneurs and providing some capital, but also some mentoring and some help in thinking about strategy and partnerships and so forth. So then it evolved from starting there 15 years ago to about 10 years ago, kind of forming Revolution as an entity, kind of a holding company with the vision of we invest in people and ideas that can change the world. And we're looking for those great entrepreneurs with great ideas that really have the potential to build great, valuable businesses, but also can improve our lives, improve how we learn, improve how we stay healthy, improve how we eat, improve how we get around, fundamental aspects of our lives, and use the prism of innovation and entrepreneurship to kind of usher in a better way for people, and in the process disrupt a traditional industry, and in the process create a significant, valuable company. Exactly what we did with AOL. The idea that we had when we started in 1985 that someday everybody would be online, it took us a long time, but eventually we got there. There are a lot of entrepreneurs out there with similarly great, bold ideas, and we want to back them and help take their ideas and help them execute against that vision and build significant, valuable businesses. So it evolved over time, and as we've done, it kept expanding, adding more people, making more investments, but it's been a lot of fun, and it's really been a way to see what's happening around the fringes and try to help some of those ideas, just as we saw our evolution kind of move from the fringes to the mainstream.
You talk about it being a kind of throwback approach to investing too, because Your approach is to really roll up your sleeves, you personally and your
Right.
team too, and get under the hood and really help these entrepreneurs learn the things they need to learn. Why have you chosen to do it that way?
Because I enjoy doing it, and it's, I think, a way to contribute and help these entrepreneurs take their dreams and make them a reality. I mean, these are the companies we back are big ideas that right now are little companies, but someday have the potential to be big companies. But it's going to take work. Yeah. I talked about all the ups and downs and some of the challenges we saw. Every company we back is going to have those challenges, and trying to take the long-term view, more of a built-to-last view, we think is important, and some of it is investing and providing capital, but some of it also is trying to be helpful as a mentor, or helping them think through and making introductions with strategic partners, or other ways that we can help take this idea and help the entrepreneur and the team at each of these companies kind of scale it. And I think it's also important. It's been fun to do that across a variety of different industry segments with a variety of different great entrepreneurs, but it's also a way to contribute to what I think is the most important challenge for our country, which is how do we remain the most innovative entrepreneurial nation? We are today, but it's worth remembering that 250 years ago, America was just a startup. It was just an idea. Mm-hmm. Now we're the leader of the free world because we have the leading economy, because we have the most innovative entrepreneurial nation, and led the agricultural revolution, and then led the industrial revolution, and more recently led the digital revolution. That's why we went from being a startup to the leading economy and the leader of the world. Well, we don't have any guarantee that's going to continue. We've seen in the last half century the globalization of manufacturing, we've seen the globalization of capital, now we're seeing the globalization of entrepreneurship. And this country needs to double down on innovation and entrepreneurship to be the pioneer, to create the breakthrough companies in this next wave, and the process create the economic growth we need to have a strong nation and a fiscally sound nation, and to create the jobs we need to make sure people are able to support their families, and particularly focus on creating good middle class jobs, because there has been a hollowing out. That, to me, is the most fundamental issue that the country faces. There are all kinds of issues and all kinds of pressures, but at the core, we need to be most innovative entrepreneurial nation. We need to get our growth rate up. We need to get our unemployment down, and the place to focus is on entrepreneurs and startups there are the folks who are going to lead the charge here and create the new ideas and create the new companies and create the jobs and drive the growth that lifts up our communities and lifts up our nation. So it's partly I do that through advocacy here in DC on a variety of different issues, and the Rise of the Rest that you mentioned in the introduction, that's part of it. How do you lift up these regions all around the country? But Revolution as an investor, so we're not just advocating this or talking about it, we're kind of putting our money where our mouth is and rolling up our sleeves and trying to help make that happen.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about Rise of the Rest in just a second, but just take us through some of the companies that you're involved with now that you're really most excited about and that you think really symbolize what you're talking about.
It's a mix. One recent investment, actually just came back from a board meeting from it, is Revolution Foods. This is a company started 8 years ago by two moms who basically said, kids, when they're in school, should have better lunches. They should be healthier. They should be more nutritious. That will help them be on a better path to kind of healthy behaviors early on that will reduce the risk down the road of heart disease and obesity and so forth, and also will help them, if they have a better lunch, have them learn more in the afternoon, so it's kind of a double win. And they concluded that the lunches now in this country are generally not very good, yet it's a $16 billion business. So these two moms said, we're going to go fix it. And now Revolution Foods is a $100 million business that has done 140 million lunches, and they're growing like crazy. So we invested in that idea because we believed in the team, we believed in the idea, we believe everybody should have a healthier lunch, and the prism of entrepreneurship is a way to provide that that path to make that possible. We've also invested in companies, including one not too far from here called Optoro, which is in a more of an enterprise business. But I don't know if you focused on this. I hadn't until we looked at this company. But if you buy any product, consumer electronics in particular, from Best Buy or Staples or anybody like that, on average about 10% of that gets returned. And it's a $250 billion business. once it gets returned, it doesn't get resold as new, it gets resold as used, and on average, only about 20% of the value is recovered. And so they created a software platform and a marketplace that can double, the what's possible for those retailers, which creates $50 billion in value. So that's an example. Runkeeper in the mobile fitness space. We really believe that if people have better tools to think about and manage their health, they will make healthier choices, and they become a leader in sort of the mobile fitness and health market. There are all kinds of great ideas that we try to back across the whole sectors of the economy and across the nation. We part of our Rise of the Rest belief is we're kind of putting our money where our mouth is, and we've said that we expect 90% of our investments to be outside of Silicon Valley, which is not to say Silicon Valley isn't awesome. Everybody knows it's awesome, and most of the investors are focused on that, and most investors are not focused on some of these other places around the country. So we want to be the helping hand to help those entrepreneurs. I think it's a better opportunity as investors too, and so there's a sort of a selfish aspect to it. But we think it's a way to lift up some of these communities and lift up some of these regions.
And the rest is between the two coasts, right? It's not Silicon Valley, right. It's not New York and that corridor. Just so everyone knows, it's not just a really amazing bus tour where you're meeting entrepreneurs. You're putting money against this, right? It's up to $100,000 for the best ideas that you
There's really
uncover.
two things we're trying to do. One is within each of these cities, and we did 4 cities in June: Detroit, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Nashville. Next week we'll do 5 more: Madison, Minneapolis, Des Moines, Kansas City, St. Louis. Is in each of these cities we spend a full day there, and we start usually meeting with some of the business leaders and politicians and try to make sure they're focused on what's important to startups. Then we get on the bus and drive around town and visit different startups and have media, both local media and national media, kind of following and watching and filming to kind of shine a spotlight on what's happening, and then do something like this, sort of a fireside chat kind of interview, and then have a pitch competition where the communities help find the 10 most promising startups, and they pitch, and then the winner gets an investment. We're hoping all 10 will actually get more capital from a variety of different sources because there's more of a spotlight. And then we kind of have a celebration of startups and entrepreneurs, and then we get on the bus and go to the next city. So it's partly try to create more of a network density, more of a sense of collaboration, more of a sense of hope, more of a sense of possibility within each of these cities. So together they work more collaboratively. The business leaders, the politicians, the startups, the universities working together to lift up the community, make it more entrepreneurial, but also to shine a spotlight on what's happening in all these places, which over time we hope, and we're beginning to see some evidence of this, but we hope it will accelerate over the next 5 or 10 years, that there will be more media attention celebrating the entrepreneurs in Pittsburgh and Des Moines, not just in Palo Alto and Manhattan, and then more investors will be getting on planes to find their great entrepreneurs all over the country. And these cities, part of the reason it's been fun, it's a reminder that the evolution of the American economy and the arc of the American story is multifaceted and multi-region. When we were in Detroit, it was pointed out that 50, 60 years ago, Detroit was Silicon Valley. Because at that time, the hot technology of the time was the automobile. Mm-hmm. And Detroit was the epicenter of innovation, not just in this country, but in the world. And Detroit was rocking and rolling. It lost its entrepreneurial mojo, kind of lost its way, and recently declared bankruptcy. And it's fighting its way back by betting on startups. 100 years ago, Pittsburgh was sort of Silicon Valley. Because at the time, the Industrial Revolution was the hot thing, and Pittsburgh was the steel capital powering the Industrial Revolution. So these things kind of ebb and flow, and if we're going to have a strong nation with a strong economy, we have to recognize that we have to support our entrepreneurs everywhere, not just in a few places. We can't have all our eggs in a few baskets.
And are you finding in places like Detroit and Pittsburgh, your theory is proving out? You've got great entrepreneurs with great ideas there.
Oh, absolutely. And we actually, again, I want to be clear, particularly because you're going to go back to the Computer History Museum in Silicon Valley. I want to be very clear. I love Silicon Valley. I'm proud of Silicon Valley. It remains sort of the pride of our country and the envy of the world, and I believe that will continue. And they're great entrepreneurs building great companies backed by great investors in Silicon Valley, full stop. But they're also great entrepreneurs in the rest of the country, and we should focus on that. And that's part of this Rise of the Rest effort, and that's part of our investment, kind of strategy at the Revolution. But just one example, the winner of the pitch competition in Detroit had started his company in San Francisco, and then decided to move to Detroit for 3 reasons. Number one, a dollar goes a lot farther in Detroit, both in terms of the money the company raised goes farther, office rent is lower, salaries are lower, and the people that are employees, it goes further because apartments are cheaper and homes are cheaper and everything is cheaper. So it's, economically there is a driver. You can get a lot further whether you're a company or an individual in some of these places than in San Francisco. Number two, he actually was from Detroit and wanted to go home. So for lifestyle reasons, he felt like this was the time to actually rather be living and raising a family in Detroit. Third, Detroit has had a tough run. It's been difficult. It declared bankruptcy. He wants to be part of the rebirth, our renaissance of Detroit. That was a battle he wanted to fight. So he moved his company from San Francisco to Detroit. I think you'll see more of that, not just Detroit, but Pittsburgh and some of the other places we've talked about. And what's happened structurally in the technology industry, it's now easier and cheaper to start companies, and you can outsource more to Amazon Web Services or other providers. And as a result, companies that 10 years ago needed to be in a place like Silicon Valley because it needed a certain amount of infrastructure and talent now can be more broadly dispersed.
Let the record show I didn't prompt you to say anything about Silicon Valley. So the fact that you did that is really very cool. So thank you. But I will say, we're going to get to the audience questions now, and I am going to tell our friends back in Silicon Valley they're going to need to raise their game because we got some amazing questions from this audience, and I can't wait to take you through a few of those. So this is a great question to ask Steve Case. What were your family's personal computer habits in the 80s and 90s, and how did they influence you in AOL?
Well, I'd say that I'd have to separate it in two parts. My family, in terms of thinking about my parents, always motivated me because they were relatively slow adopters, not early adopters. And for most of the 80s and 90s, my mantra at AOL, as we tried to get America Online, is we need to make this easy enough for my mom to use. This was like the rallying cry. Which, by the way, my mom was always a little offended by. She said, I'm way better than your dad. Why don't you talk about your dad? But I had already locked into the mom thing, and it seemed to work and get people motivated, so it was the mom thing. So it was how do we make this so easy, so accessible that my mom could use it? That was one factor. And then in terms of raising your own family with 5 kids, watching how they use technology, and they are part of this kind of digital natives because they kind of grew up with these tools, absolutely helped instruct what we're doing, including some of the things that we were quite active on even 15 plus years ago about how do we give people the benefits of the internet, but also protect against some of the risks. So we spent a lot of time on the issues like kids and how do you keep them safe and parental controls and things like that. A lot of issues around privacy and security. A lot of investment both with AOL and then with the Case Foundation that my wife Jean, who's here, has run for 17 years now on a digital divide initiative. We wanted to make sure this technology did not exacerbate the divide between the rich and the poor, and we wanted to use it as a tool to give people more opportunity. But 15 years ago, we launched this initiative and built 1,000 computer centers with a variety of different partnerships. There are a lot of neighborhoods in this country that did not have computers, did not have internet, and often their homework would get assigned that required it, and these kids didn't have it, and we wanted to make sure they did. So we made a lot of investments to try to deal with that. So we did learn from watching our own experience, our consumption, kids, friends, others, how they were using these technologies, and that helped us continue to optimize it while trying to play this longer game about building a medium that could change the world, that could be as pervasive and but even more powerful and positive than the television or the telephone or other technologies that had been so seminal in the previous century.
Here's another great question. Did you ever fear failure, and how did you overcome that fear in order to keep pursuing your goals?
I did. I mean, we actually launched again at the Case Foundation a couple of years ago an initiative called Be Fearless, which if you haven't seen, I'd encourage you to look at, because it's really about this issue of how do you kind of get people to kind of swing for the fences and take risks. Because Babe Ruth, the baseball star. People used to remember him because he was the home run king. That was the good part. What they didn't necessarily focus on, he also was the strikeout king. He got up the plate, he was swinging for the fences, and if you swing for the fences, you are going to miss a lot. But if you don't swing for the fences, you're never going to have a home run. You're never going to have a hit. That strategy, that belief has always kind of motivated us and is part of the Be Fearless effort. In terms of my own fear of failure with AOL, there were many moments where it didn't look like we were going to make it. We were running out of money. The partnership we lost with Apple was a crisis. We had many of those near-death experiences before we suddenly became a 10-year in the making overnight success. What helped me was, even though I did worry sometimes that we might not make it, I always believed in the idea. I knew in my heart the idea of the internet, the idea of getting everybody online, the idea of how this could transform our lives. I always believed in, and that was sort of the North Star, the light at the end of the tunnel that kept me going, even though we had some rocky moments, particularly in the first 5 or so years when we launched the company.
Your point about execution being everything led to this question. What makes execution good? And if you can name one thing that's the most important, what would that be?
People, priorities, and passion, which are 3 things, but at least they're all P's. I mean, you got to have the right people. As I mentioned, entrepreneurship is a team sport. You've got to recruit the right people. You've got to focus them on the right priorities. A lot of companies get lost or stray because they're trying to do too many things. People are confused about what the mission are. So clear priorities are important, and passion is important. You can't fake it. If you're trying to change the world, it's going to take a while. It's going to be hard. There are going to be kind of good days and bad days, good years and bad years. And you have to be passionate about that mission. Everybody in your core team has to be passionate about that mission, or you'll give up when the going gets tough. So I think execution is some mix of the right people, focused, working together, the right priorities and passion. I'd add that there's another wave, I think, about to break in the internet, sort of the third wave, that's going to also require more sensitivity around policy and more of a focus on partnerships. And the reason for that, just as background, the way I think of it, the first wave, we talked a lot about that tonight, from sort of 85 to 2000, was simply building the internet, building the foundation of the internet, getting people connected, getting people to understand why it was important. So that was sort of the first 15 years was just building the internet. The last 15 years, sort of the second wave, has been building on top of the internet, because it already existed. The focus and the innovation, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or Google or others, was building apps, products, services on top of the internet. And that's been a really important wave. That's become a very hits business, where viral distribution and word of mouth becomes really, really important. And it has been, it has created the opportunity for more overnight successes. That Snapchat, as a recent example, didn't exist a few years ago, and suddenly is a phenomenon. That's been the second wave. The third wave, which I'm really excited by, is because we already built the internet and then built things on top of the internet. The third wave is about integrating the internet really seamlessly and sometimes invisibly into every aspect of our lives. So things like the Internet of Things, the different kinds of devices become important. Things like using technology, particularly the internet, to reimagine how K-12 education happens, or how healthcare is delivered to keep you healthy, or to deal with chronic disease, or deal with life-threatening disease, or how technology is used to better help us understand the trade-offs around energy consumption. This is what's going to drive the third wave, and policy is going to be more important, because whether you like it or not, and a lot of people in Silicon Valley don't like it, the government in every country in the world is going to be involved in regulating some of these industries. Transportation, energy, food, healthcare are going to be regulated. You can argue it should be less regulation, you can argue it should be different regulation, but there can be some regulation, and engaging on that policy level is going to be important. And partnerships are going to be important. Unlike the second wave, where you could go alone, in this third wave, you got to go together. And there's a great African proverb that I think is going to be the heart and soul of this third wave, which is, you want to go quickly, you can go alone. But if you want to go far, you must go together. And you're going to need strategic partnerships in this third wave. If you're trying to reinvent education, you're going to have to partner with the schools. If you're trying to reinvent healthcare, you're going to have to partner with the doctors and the hospitals. If you're a startup trying to change some of the industry, you're going to have to partner with some of the larger companies in those industries. You're going to have to co-opt some of these folks, not just ignore them, which was more common in the second wave. So execution is a lot around people and priorities and passion, but the 2 P's I would add for this next wave, this third wave, would also be policy and partnerships.
One final question that I'm going to ask from the audience, rather, and then I'm going to ask the last question. The online experience for newspapers in this country has been very mixed. What do you think about what's happening to newspapers and the news business generally, and where do you think that's going to wind up?
Well, we've been involved for a long time. Actually, the year before we went public, so it was 1991, the Tribune Company in Chicago made an investment in AOL, and we did a strategic partnership with them and created an entity called Digital Cities to try to help newspapers navigate this world and be more relevant. I would say in general, and some did this better than others, the focus, and this is true with a lot of different large companies, and it's why there's opportunities for entrepreneurs to disrupt the status quo, is they're generally focused on protecting what's there and not as passionate and aggressive on trying to build what's coming. So they're kind of playing defense more than offense. And I learned through the evolution of AOL, and even before the merger with Time Warner, when we got large, but certainly after the merger with Time Warner, we kind of shifted from being an attacker to being a defender. And I think innovation happens if you're an attacker. And the newspaper industry, for the most part, has been a defender, and that's created opportunities for a lot of different, Craigslist or Yelp or others to emerge that should have been businesses that the newspapers really led on and dominated, but because they were more focused on managing today's business and not focused enough on where the puck was going and tomorrow's business, they generally missed that opportunity. Now, there's some exceptions. I mentioned ESPN being one, but for the most part, the most powerful, valuable media brands 25 years ago have lost much, in some cases all of their value, as huge new businesses have been built on the back of some of the same ideas that newspapers were focused on before.
There's a final P, ironically, in this discussion, which is philanthropy. You've devoted a considerable amount of the last decade to that. Talk a little bit about where you're putting your time and interest and what you really hope to accomplish as really a great philanthropist these days.
Thank you. First of all, I should say my wife, Jean, has been the CEO of the Case Foundation for all 17 years, so she really takes the lead on our philanthropic work. I'm involved in some of it, but mostly she's driving it, and I take the lead on the investment side with Revolution. But I mentioned before the vision for Revolution is we invest in people and ideas that can change the world. Well, guess what? Our vision for the Case Foundation is exactly the same. We invest in people and ideas that can change the world, and we look for great entrepreneurs in the social sector who want to bring their ideas to scale, and we've done a number of things that are startups. I mentioned the Digital Divide initiative we did called Power Up. We've done a number of things that we think of as growth speed-ups, using investment terminology. We've been big supporters of Special Olympics and Habitat for Humanity and organizations like that. But our particular focus, particularly in the last 5 years, has been using entrepreneurship and collaboration to deal with big problems in our world that require this cross-sector collaboration. There is a role, a seat at the table for business, but you've also got to engage the NGOs, the nonprofit sector, and you've got to engage governments. How you drive that collaboration, we think, is going to be critically important. One focus recently, last couple of years, has been on impact investing. How do we get people to look at the possibility? 100 years ago, if you were an investor, you focused on return. Then we had some problems, including the Depression. People said, well, actually, you should focus on return, but also focus on risk. So it was risk, return and risk. That's basically been what's driven most investment decisions for the last half century. We think the next half century, it'll add a third aspect, which is impact. What is the impact of this business? So it'll be risk, return, plus impact. And there are more people that are looking at this space and trying to look at using business as a tool for social change to drive this forward. And we also spent a lot of time on all the different Case Foundation initiatives trying to build this collaboration, try to get more people to the table and how to encourage people to take more risks, which is why we launched the Be Fearless initiatives. And not surprising, given what I mentioned earlier about innovation and entrepreneurship being so central to the story of America in the last 250 years and so central to the future of this country. We've also done a number of initiatives through the foundation focused on that, including launching the Startup America Partnership and support of an organization like Up Global with their Startup Weekend program. So it's a variety of different programs. I'm very proud of what we've been able to contribute there, mostly by engaging other people and using that same African proverb I mentioned, trying to go far by going together with everybody at the table trying to push forward.
You've been very generous with your time tonight. It's been a fascinating conversation. Steve, thanks very much. Please
Thank
join
you.
me in thanking Steve Case.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.